All
All
right,
right.
so here we are. Josh and David back. You're home from the road. I'm still on the road with Kings of
Right,
Thrash. You
right.
just finished your Primer 55. Well, one leg of the tour. So how was it? Does it feel good to be a rock star again or what?
Dude, it was amazing. And I know a lot of like the fans of the show probably, I don't know how much they care about the new metal era or whatnot, but the fan the I did shows with this band in 2008 to like nobody. And then we got the, let's do a show, let's do a tour, let's do a run, not knowing what to expect. And man, every night, tons of fans, tons of young fans, tons of
Hmm.
merch flying off the shelves. Had to reorder merch halfway through the run and get that overnighted to the band and stuff. So everybody walked away from this tour with a smile on their face, and can't wait for the next run.
So you are truly now a classic rock new metal band, right?
Right?
I think if enough time goes by, especially you guys haven't been working or the band hasn't
Hmm.
been working and now you are, it's now there's like this, it's like the takeaway in sales, I guess,
Yeah.
right? Once it goes away for a while, people want it more, which is,
Yeah.
you
I
were sending me pictures, dude. You're rocking your Kelly Bird, which looks super dope. You got
look
Black
good.
Star amps now
Hmm.
working with you
Got
and
the SIT string sounding
SIT
good.
strings. So, dude, you are full
Yeah.
on hooked up, which is killer. Yeah, it looked
Yeah.
great, man. Looked super badass, man. I was super stoked for you. So,
And definitely met a few David Ellefson podcast listeners out there. Definitely, I had a long conversation with the guy in Dallas. He was like, "Can I ask you a couple of questions?" And I'm like, "Sure." And he goes, "How did you get a podcast with David Ellefson?" And I was like, "I just asked him if he wanted to do it." But
that's
yeah.
pretty
So
much
so
how easy it is with me. Hey, you want to get a burger? Sure. Hey, you want to play in a band? No problem. Hey, you want to do a podcast? Yeah, why not? It's
sure, why not?
just flowing through life, man. That's what
Yeah.
it is. No, it's funny. I've had people out here too in my travels, just various things, the Comic Con shows, whatever. People loving the podcast. We've kind of found our niche, right?
Hmm.
We've got our little thrash metal groove we're in, but not exclusively that. And we got some other cool guests coming up here
Yeah.
along the way. So yeah, so that's what we thought. Look, why don't you and me just check in since time is precious for you and me to even get a minute. We're both not moving on separate islands
Right.
out here on the road, and you're back home, and I'm in New Jersey today. So hey everybody, David and Josh here, and just want to let you know about Rockabilia, our new partners here on the show, and you can visit them and enter David10 for 10% off on any of your purchases. So some cool stuff they have there, Josh.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome company. I mean, if you're of my generation of the we go to the magazine aisle, and when it was a print magazine, and Rockabilia was in every Metal Edge and Metal Maniacs and whatever else, and you would circle every Megadeth t-shirt you wanted, or Metallica or Slayer or whatnot. So super pumped to have Rockabilia on with the David Ellefson show. And just a few things. They've got over 500,000 items over at rockabilia.com, including staples like the Master of Puppets shirts, Rest in Peace shirts. They do limited edition exclusive drops each month. And the one thing that they wanted to stress was everything is 100% authentic, no bootlegs over there at rockabilia.com. So that's obviously a plus there too.
Cool. So the money goes where it's supposed to go. So all right, excellent. All right, so check it out. Rockabilia, David 10 for 10% off. Check it out, rockabilia.com. The news of the hour, news of the earth
Yeah.
is Ace Frehley passing away, which, it's funny. I flew up here to Philadelphia to start our tour is Thursday. People were hitting me up. My friend Meltdown from
Mhm.
Riff over in Detroit. So I just did a podcast with him. He hit me right away, as he did right after when Ozzy passed. I mean,
Very smart. Yeah.
I was messaging Eddie Trunk, Frank Bello. I'm going, dude, is this real? Is he still with us? Is he gone? And just trying to see what the news is, because I saw it. I saw it kind of push through the socials real quick. That he was hospitalized, and I didn't read it. I mean, I was kind of busy doing my stuff, but it caught my attention. And then to hear that, and Sean Drover was messaging me, and he said, "Yeah, I'm talking to Willie G, and the news is he's already passed, and they're just waiting for the announcement, which came then a few minutes later, So it's, um, I'm glad I got to know Ace. He played on the Altitudes and Attitude record with me and Frank
Oh,
Bello.
nice. I didn't know
He
that. Yeah.
blew a solo on there. Yeah, our producer Jay Rustin
Nice.
worked to get that on there. So then me and Frank, we'd always send Ace happy birthday messages once a year. You know what I mean? Like it was, Wayne and Garth, Wayne's World. It's like, we're not worthy. Happy
Right,
birthday.
right.
One of those. And Ace is always super cool. And then I got to, hang with him at the Eddie Trunk 40th, his 40th anniversary and broadcasting over in Las Vegas back in, it was December 2023, I guess it was. And so I played on the event and had dinner with him and Don Jameson, and we got to just really hang out and talk. And, we talked Kiss and Megadeth stories, and just, once again, you realize you're all in the same band. It doesn't
Right,
matter,
right.
Primer, Megadeth, Kiss. It's Van Halen. You read these memoirs. Like I got the new Ozzy memoir here on the bus, Last Rites, and I just pick it up. And I love his book because you can pick it up and just kind of read anywhere, and there's awesome stories. It's kind of
Yeah.
like the David Lee Roth book. You just pick it up anywhere. It's like tabletop reading. But you realize, dude, when you're in the professional, well, in a band, period, but certainly when you're in the professional side of it, it's like you could just change the names, dates, covers, photo on the front. We're all in the same band, you know what I
Oh,
mean? So,
totally.
um, but Alex Skolnick posted a really great thing on Facebook that I saw today, and it was the I think it was the 1978 cover of Guitar Player magazine, which would have been Kiss Alive 2, that
Hmm.
big era. And Ace Frehley was on the cover. I can't remember if they interviewed also Paul and Gene in that one. I remember there's one where they kind of had I think they had all three of them in there, but Ace was the cover story. And Alex, it's funny, Alex, like Jeff Young, educated musicians, but started out as rockers, and now they kind of get to blend the both together, right? But
Hmm.
Alex was commenting in his post about how the purists of the magazine, the people that like Larry Carlton and Tommy Tedesco, these guys, the player kind of guys, how
Right.
could you do this to our beloved magazine? Put this
Right.
trash like Kiss and Ace Frehley and da 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 da. And, I feel like, and he said it best. He said, Ace made a lot of people want to play air guitar, but a lot of those people also went on to play guitar,
Yeah.
and talk about influence. And I know when I worked at PD, when we were doing artist relations, that was sort of a lot of all of a sudden everybody started getting signature models, but that was always the baseline is this player a player of influence, because those are the
Hmm.
people that the music companies and
Yeah.
endorsements and sponsorships want to work with, right? You're a player of influence. You can influence people to use this product. If you're in country music, it would be probably Visa, Chevrolet,
Hmm.
Jim Beam. If you're in
Right.
rock and roll, it's Gibson, Jackson, Marshall, Black Star, you know what I mean?
Right.
Whatever.
Right.
So, but so anyway, just so look, you're younger than me,
Yeah.
and how did Ace influence you? Like, how did he impact you, and what's your response and feeling to the whole thing with him passing right now?
Yeah. So as I was, we were traveling, I started seeing the stuff on Facebook and Instagram about him being in the hospital on life support. And then we get to the venue and we're sound checking. And kind of as we're sound checking, I check my phone again and the news is that he's passed. And so we get done with sound check and I go in the green room and I whip out the laptop and I go to the website, metalnexus.net, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna write a little piece about Ace. And I had really no idea what direction I was gonna go. And I just kind of just started pouring out emotions and things into the words. And by the end of it, I was bawling. Like I was crying my eyes out in the green room. And even like one of my bandmates came in, Bobby Burns walks in, and I'm like trying to be strong, and stop
Yeah,
crying.
yeah,
And he looked at me and like, he's a big Ace guy. Preston, our drummer, is huge into Kiss, and like he just gave me a hug and he's like, man, I get it. But with Kiss was I was 8 or 9 years old. It was the late '80s. They were already out. They were already out of the makeup. They were already on to Bruce Kulick and Eric Carr and Eric Singer and all. Like it wasn't the original lineup, but I had older cousins that played me double platinum, and I remember with the
right.
record needle just rock and roll all night over and over and over. Just like I just something changed that day, in me.
Hmm.
And then as I start looking at the vinyl records, and I see Ace, and I didn't know what a Les Paul was at the time, but I knew that was a cool guitar because Ace played it. And I even went to a pawn shop and put one on layaway when I was like, 9 years old, 10 years old. I talked to my dad into like putting a it was a Les Paul copy on layaway. I found out later. Um, but then then we moved to a different state. I never got the guitar, and then when I actually finally do get into music, I actually picked up the bass first. But Ace was the one that made me want to do that. Made me want to get on
Mhm.
stage, made me want to play in front of people, and it really hit me that that kid that idolized Ace Frehley and thought he was the coolest, funniest dude on the planet had just got off sound check on a tour that's doing well, and like it all collided all at once. All the emotions of everything just all hit me all at once, and I was back there, just tears just streaming down my face because of just my love of Ace Frehley, and thankful that I latched onto that at such a young age and made me want to play.
So yeah, so like both you and me, look, we're out here. I always say Kiss is the reason you and I are even talking right now, right?
Hmm.
And so a couple things about that. Firstly, I got to my hotel room. You and I were texting. In fact, you even said that. He goes, dude, how bizarre. I just got off stage sound checking and my
Hmm.
hero's gone, one of my
Right.
heroes. And so I got to the hotel room and I turned on the TV and I was shocked that it wasn't everywhere. You know what I mean? Because like, even if it was, former Kiss guitarist or
Yeah.
Kiss founding member, pronounced dead or he has died, some big thing. I was shocked that it wasn't that, and look, Ace, look, Kiss is essentially done now, but it's still
Hmm.
Kiss. I mean, it's still the Beatles. So I thought that was I was kind of disappointed that it didn't have a bigger media reach. And it doesn't matter because
Right.
it's not about what the mainstream thinks, it's about what we think. And look, the fact that all of us are sitting around talking, there's guys, Ozzy, Eddie Van Halen,
Hmm.
Ace Frehley, any Kiss member, right? I mean, these guys have literally changed the orbit of the Earth, with their influence and what they did.
Hmm.
It makes you wonder, because Kiss, like you said, so they had the four guys. I think Ace was the first to leave, and or Peter, whatever. I
Peter
forgot how
left
that went
first.
down.
Yeah,
Peter
Peter
left.
left
Okay.
first because yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, because after really Dynasty, I never bought Dynasty. My friend Greg Hanavit bought Dynasty. I'd go to his house and listen to it, but I didn't listen to that because by then I started getting into Van Halen.
Hmm.
The first Van Halen record came out, and that record had the same impact to me that they were my new Kiss. That was like,
Yeah.
holy shit, these guys, again, changed the course of the earth. But it's interesting. Makes you wonder if the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, because once a member, once they broke up, like with the Beatles, or in the case of Led Zeppelin, a member dies, that's it. It's over now, right?
Hmm.
So it makes you wonder, had they replaced a member like the Who did? The Who got someone to replace their drummer, Keith Moon, and then they went on and continued to make records and make music, just like Kiss did. They continued on. Then
Yeah.
it was the no makeup phase. Then they put the makeup back on. Marty Friedman and I were second row in Phoenix in 1996 when they put the makeup
Nice.
back on. And it's that thing because now at this point we knew how all of it worked, the sound, the
Yeah.
lights. We knew that these were real guys who we had met in person, and now they're here they are with the makeup. So some of the mystique was gone, but you can't help but sit there, like the feeling you just had this week, going,
Yeah.
those are my freaking heroes, man. Those are my idols. They're the reason I even exist as a musician.
Hmm.
Because it wasn't, the thing about them, they weren't just musicians. They taught us how to be rock stars. And
Right.
they're two, they can go together, but sometimes, you know, they're two very different skill sets. Because you were all around musicians, and you're like, yeah, this guy's never going to be a rock star, as great as he can play or sing or whatever. It's just that's just not. They don't think
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah.
So it's a different thinking, and I always feel like Kiss. For those of us who are inclined, to do this, and you and I are doing it, Alex Skolnick, Jeff Young, all of us that are out here doing it, Kiss, Vinny, or a
Yeah.
Dime,
Yeah.
those guys. I mean, come on. They made us strive for that thing. Like you said, getting out of the house, getting on stage and playing. Same with me. I mean, my first band with Greg Handevitt, Taz or whatever, it might have even
Hmm.
been Taz yet. But, the first thing I had to have was some platform boots, some platform boots
Nice.
and
Yeah.
a silk shirt, you know what I mean? In Jackson, Minnesota, I'm like, I got to get something what would Kiss wear right now? And I couldn't, we were going to wear makeup, but it's like, we got to have something what would Gene do? You know what I mean? So, And it's funny because sitting down listening to Kiss music, watching stuff push through socials, and I'm just breaking and listening to Kiss live when I go to the gym and
Mhm.
stuff. And I'm like, God damn, man, Gene is such a great bass player, man.
Oh,
He
absolutely.
thought he thought like a bass player, as much as I guess he, writes on guitar and everything else too. And again, he gives credit obviously to Paul McCartney.
Hmm.
Like even Rock and Roll All Night, which is right? The chords are pretty simple, right? But his bouncing ba da bum bum ba bum ba bum bum ba
Yep.
da da bum bum, it's what gives the song a bounce. It gives it a movement. If you're dancing to it, if you're rocking out to it, it's the thing that gives it motion. And that's, Motown, James Jamerson. That's just kind of classic. I remember my Mel Bay Volume 1 electric bass book. One of the first things you do, aside from learning the notes on the neck, is you learn how to walk a bass line.
Right.
Right? It's just bass playing 101 is learning how to, because we're the guys that give the movement in
Yeah.
between the chords. Um, and so I don't know. What are your thoughts on Gene and just Kiss musicianship?
Well, the one thing I was reading some comments under your you made blabbermouth once again, but your and the quote was something along the lines of Ace being as influential, if not more, than Eddie Van Halen, and a lot of people were pushing back, saying that like Eddie could play circles around Ace, and I want to be like that's not, it doesn't
It's
matter.
not
Like
the
Ace
point. Yeah.
is not the point because it's not about talent. It's about making you want to pick up a guitar. It's making because he was Ace was so funny and so like charming and like even like like that drunk, what is it, Tom whatever,
Oh yeah, Tom
interview,
Schneider. Tom
Tom Snyder
Schneider.
interview, like where
Yeah.
Gene and Paul are just, you could just tell they're just rage, and Ace is over there just cackling and everything else. Like you just wanted to be that dude. And even like all the grunge dudes, they all loved Ace. Weezer sang about Ace, and Kurt Cobain loved Ace, and like that's the one thing that I did appreciate about kind of the grunge movement is they weren't really, they didn't really hide their Kiss fandom. Like a lot of the Melvins and all those guys all loved Kiss, and
Yeah.
because there for a minute it was kind of a dirty word to be like, oh, I'm a Kiss fan, and you're like, you nerd,
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and back to just songwriting, and they weren't your typical metal band or hard rock band. Like you said, I mean, Gene's bass playing is like once you dive into it, you start paying attention to what he's doing, and the amount of bass slides every night that I do is that's all Gene
Dude,
Simmons. It's,
Gene, man. So and while he's singing, like you listen to Cold Gin, the album version, then you listen to the Kiss Alive version. He's
hmm.
playing different parts. You can tell he might have even fucked a couple little licks up, or he went for some licks that he
Yeah,
didn't normally play, but and I don't know if I'm sure they probably re-recorded some of that stuff, but singing and playing all the
yeah,
components of it, right?
yeah. Singing, playing, also wearing all that nonsense, all the gear, all the platform heels, the armor, and the face paint. But and that's that's the one thing with Ace, with the whole space theme, and the smoking guitar, the shooting fireworks off of it. I mean, that was
You know,
unheard of.
I think a lot of it is too, is their manager, Bill Coyne,
Hmm.
who I understand had like a TV background. He really, he taught them the showmanship.
Hmm.
There's that thing, the show, they're playing Deuce on the Midnight Special. And when they're doing da 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 da
Hmm.
da 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 da,
Yep.
right? And Ace is over there soloing. Gene and Paul turn toward the drum riser, they do their shtick. And then they turn
Yep.
towards stage left, they do their shtick. And by the time they turn all the way around, now Ace is in the line with them, and now they're doing
Yep.
it, not right. And as kind of corny and cheesy as it looks, like you go to the Motown exhibit. I don't know if you've ever been there before,
No, I haven't.
but in Detroit, it's super great because they talk about that if you walk into Motown studios, a musician, you leave a star. And that
Yeah.
doesn't just happen. That does not just happen. That takes, Barry Gordy, the president of Motown. He had a vision of how to make the Jackson Five, just five little boys, to turn them into a star. How they sit, how they talk on TV, the clothes they wear, their dance moves, everything about it, And so Kiss went through the ringer with that when you read their books and excuse me, that wasn't Kiss was not an accident. It was intentional, high level show business, man. And the songs and the music were the backing track for it. But I think what it teaches a lot of people, I think, or at least I like to think, what it teaches people is that um, just like when you go see a Broadway play or you see a musical, the musicians in the orchestra pit, as accomplished as they are, they're really the backing track to what the visual is on stage, and that gets lost on a lot of musicians. A lot of musicians are so, if it isn't in their 21 frets of their fingerboard, it's like the life just doesn't exist. They're just lost without their instrument, right? They're just so in that world. They don't understand that they're just a small part of a greater whole, and Kiss clearly got that, and that's what made them, in my opinion, one of the top, top three greatest rock and roll acts ever on the planet, is that they understood, they understood that, as there's Paul Stanley thing said, you basically remember the beginning of the show, you remember the end of the show, and a few moments in between. And their job was
Right.
to create those few moments in between. Breathe fire, spit blood. Paul flies out to the middle. They have a
Mm-hmm.
drum solo. You know what I mean? There's these takeaways, so you don't remember everything of a show. It's impossible. As much as your mind is capturing it, and the subconscious is snapshotting all of it. You only recall key moments, right? And Beth, the piano and
Mm-hmm.
all this stuff. So they were masters at creating moments that changed our lives, from during the show. And that is, again, to musicians who overplay, play too much,
Yeah.
don't shut up and let anyone else have a musical conversation. You know what I mean? And think that it's all just about the notes. It's like the notes, while they're important, the notes really are just a smaller part of the greater presentation, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
that for me is what I loved about Kiss, is that the music was just the soundtrack to the show and the performance.
Oh yeah, totally. And one thing kind of growing up, obviously growing up when I did, in the mid 90s, I'm in my teens. Um, and I got to go see the Bad Boys of Kiss tour. It was Peter was opening for Ace. It was like it was in a club, about 1,000 cap club, and it was cool to see that. And then a year or two later, then the reunion happens, and now you
Mhm.
know that every band is never finished, and it's always going to come back, and they're
Yeah,
they're always going to
yeah.
reunite, and everything. Everything's kind of cyclical when it comes to bands and the way that they reform. But at that age, I was just like, well, they took the makeup off in the '80s, and they're never ever going to put it back on. And
Right,
then
right.
and then when I'm 17, I'm in Bridgestone Arena, and Kiss is playing with the makeup, and I'm just like, again, never thought I would see that in my life, and
Right.
just on cloud, a
Yeah.
hundred at that point, being able to see them. And then obviously over the years, I got to see Ace a couple of more times. And actually, I guess technically I saw one of Ace's last shows because he was just here a couple weeks
Really?
ago. You
Wow.
know,
Okay.
because it was Ace, Slaughter, Quiet Riot, like right after we interviewed Rudy Sarzo.
No kidding. Wow. Okay.
And so yeah, so unfortunately Ace was not at his peak at that day.
Right.
Um, and I was hoping that when they announced that he had some health issues that he needed to take care of, I was hoping whatever was making him not perform well that night, he was getting that taken care of.
Right.
And he was going to come back stronger. They got the Kennedy honors, the Kennedy Center honors coming up. Hopefully they would maybe play or at least all be on stage together doing something.
Yeah.
We got robbed of that. And the only other part of the whole thing I didn't care too much for was Kiss's statement, which could be Chat GPT, could be an intern, could be, a manager, but they said that he was irreplaceable. And I'm like, you replaced him a ton of times, and when he said he wanted to come back, and you didn't really let him come back when he wanted to come back or play the
Right.
final show, all that stuff. So I hated that they used the phrasing that he was irreplaceable.
That's funny. It could be Chat GPT. Isn't that funny? So, here's the funny thing. So 1993, I guess it was, right? So Gene's doing the Kiss My Ass album, right? The makeup's
Yep.
off. They're doing Kiss Alive 3. It's Eric Singer, Bruce Kulick, and our manager, Ron, comes to us and says, hey, he wants to do this. Now, um, he goes, have Junior deal with it, right? So me and Gene talked a few times on the phone
Nice.
and had great calls. And, Gene was, I would say, I don't want to use the word more humble. He was more sort of calculated because, like the makeup was off and you could tell they're kind of thinking, what is the next move here? What do we do? Right? Because
Yeah.
if the numbers, things aren't going upward or they're staying flat, how does a business grow? Right? You're just thinking about that. Right. And then, of course, a couple years later, they would put the makeup back on. Right. So he's thinking, all right, I'll get a lot of people always talking about how they like Kiss. Like you said, the grunge guys, Megadeth, Pantera, Anthrax were all. So
Hmm.
he has the idea. Let's get a bunch of people to come in and kind of cover Kiss songs. I thought a cool idea. So I talked to him, and things were just too expensive for us. He was saying, "Yeah, you could do it as an 8 track, you could do it," and I said, "Nah, Gene, that's not going to happen in our world." We were in a, we were making, we were at kind of at a peak right during that time.
That's
So
like
for us to go,
countdown euthanasia.
yeah,
Yeah.
so for us to go in the studio and make songs cost us 20 grand a day back in those days.
Yeah.
Like when we were doing Beavis and Butthead and Go to Hell and all that. Shit, it was just expensive, right, to get in the studio and do it, and Max Norman producing and everything that goes into it, right? So, the one thing Dave said, he goes, "Tell Gene we want to do an Ace Frehley song," and I'm like, like great way to win him over, Dave. You know what I mean? So I don't even know if we had a conversation about the song. I might have mentioned it, but then it's funny because that didn't end up happening, and it moved on. I think Garth Brooks was kind of the big headliner on that one.
Yeah.
But then when we did the Euthanasia record, we actually did a cover of Strange Ways as a
Nice.
B-side. We did some extra tracks. So I thought that I think it's on War Chest as well. So that was cool. Ace wrote a lot of these cool, deep cuts. Obviously, Cold Gin, and
Hmm.
as he talked about in his book, he was too shy to sing them.
Right.
Until Gina Paul finally said, "Enough! I'm tired of singing your songs. You need to sing." And then he sings "Shock Me," and we're like, "Fuck yeah, dude! Ace is singing." And that. And then I love on side 4 of Kiss Alive 2. Rocket Ride is killer.
Hmm.
I think did they each do a song or something on side 4, and then they did, and then she kissed me, some cover song or
Right.
something.
Yeah,
So
that was a lot of the stuff they said. Like Bob Kulick, I think, played a lot of that stuff
played a
too.
lot of it, yeah. And isn't it funny? You can hear Bob Kulick playing, and you read Ace's book, and he talks about how he didn't write. He wrote a little bit on Destroyer, which is my first Kiss record. He wrote some on some of these records, but how he kind of was losing interest, and now they talked about it in a Kiss documentary where he wanted to leave the band, and Gene
Yeah.
said, do not leave, man. Please do not leave. Like, bad for you, bad for us. Just don't do it." And then the manager, Bill Aucoin, I think, said, "Let's put out 4 solo records at the same time.
Yeah.
Just that way it looks cohesive. It looks like it was a planned effort. Um,
And then
and
unfortunately, Aces is the one that had the hit, and so that gets probably
yeah,
makes him more want to leave. You know.
yeah. And his, I see, like, I used Fractured Mirror on my post. I saw
Hmm.
Mike Portnoy did too on my social media post, just offering my condolences. To me, that's just such a great song. His whole first solo record is
Yeah.
just pure gold, man. Every song, Snowblind,
Rip it
Fractured
out.
Mirror, New
Yep.
York Groove, dude. Yeah, me and Frank Bello, we put "Rip It Out" in our set when we were doing Altitudes and Attitude. Me and Greg Hanover used to play that and Taz. It was just so
Yeah.
badass.
But
So
it's so funny. My last night, I get back to like I drove to Indianapolis to start the tour, and then last night I get to Indianapolis and I'm driving 2 hours home, and I throw in a speeding back to my baby. I was
dude,
like this
come
the
on.
I was like
Yeah.
this is so appropriate for right now.
Dude, it's so killer, man. And it just, and there again, his vocal abilities weren't, some, shining, vocal performances, but it was Ace, and you could hear him
Hmm.
in the song, and you could hear him singing, what he was feeling, what he wanted to say. And, there again, back to musicians, when people talk, oh, that guy can't sing, he sucks. It's like, doesn't matter. David
Right.
Lee Roth, he put forth the attitude of the showmanship that band needed. Same with Dave and Megadeth. I always had his back on his vocal abilities, and his singing. It was my idea for him to be the singer. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's like I saw it firsthand, dude. You're writing the lyric. No one's going to tell that story better than you. Even, forget this isn't about vocal abilities and vocal acrobatics. This is
Yeah.
about being a storyteller because when you're singing, you're basically a voice actor.
Yeah.
It's no different than doing a Pixar movie where you got a bunch of famous people being voice actors. That's all you really do when you're singing is you're a voice actor. And that to me was what Ace was. Ace was this kind of, unfiltered, raw sound. And you could just hear, that's what I loved about 10,000 volts, is
Yeah.
like you could really hear Ace's character, coming through in a really, really cool way, So yeah, it's interesting about that with Kiss, because look, he's been out of the band for a lot of years. Obviously, they've sold everything off. Ace and Peter, I guess, sold off their rights to the makeup to Gene and Paul.
Yeah.
And so they really had no claim to any of it anymore. And to Ace's credit, he moved on. Like he wasn't just making his living on being a Kiss guy. I mean, he'll always be that. But he was out making records and doing Ace Frehley stuff. He was
Yeah.
out being his own guy. Eddie Trunk signed him to his first record deal with at Megaforce. So they which I thought was great. So all of us Kiss fans, it's just kind of Kiss fans unite. So it is hard because there's sort of a broken bloodline in the family, the Kiss
Hmm.
family, between all of them, and that's just how it is in bands sometimes. But I think for all of us fans, we don't care about any of that, man. It's like we just, he was our hero. That music changed our lives. And look, let's face it, now you and me, it's our turn up to bat, and we're out doing it, and we're just giving our credence and our love of it all back to Kiss, So
Yeah. I'll I'll edit this question out if you don't want me to put it in, but I'll start it with with Ozzy passing, with Ace passing, does it make you want to pick up the phone to call Dave?
I had someone say that after I finished with the Ozzy gig. Um, just saying, dude, let's just get over it. And I said, but I was like, again, I don't. The problem if it is me and Dave were always together as a band. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? We never just hung out just as buddies, not in the band. It was always sort of angled with us being in the band together.
Yeah.
Look, he's got his own band, he's got his own record, he's got his new music. I'm not part of that. I mean, I think he made it really clear in his press statement he doesn't want to play music with me again, you know.
Right.
And whether that was just a knee-jerk, anger, statement or it was true, I don't know. But you know, look, I would take his call. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like, you know, that was like if suddenly it was the moment to do that. But I don't know, maybe there is something to be said for that, right? Because look, none of us, none of us get out of here alive, as the saying goes,
Yeah.
right? And our time is limited. Um, there's only there's only so many miles on the road for all of us, and
Yeah.
I don't want for sure. It would be nice if things between me and Dave and me and Megadeth as just an entity didn't end on a sour note. I think that's what the farewell statement has sort of raised all those questions, which is
Hmm.
why I said right away, I said, look, I would be open to it if for nothing else to just sort of close the circle, close the gap, and it all ends with us, if not being best of friends, because
Yeah.
we don't have to go there, but at least just sort of closing the gap, and
Yeah.
closing the circle, because look at what happened. I mean, Kiss played, and look, would it have been appropriate for Ace to come out and play? I mean, why not? But
Yeah.
I think in Gene and Paul's mind, as a band guy myself, it's like, well, he's not part of the band. He's just not part of the act. He's not part of the show. Like, where do we squeeze that in? Yet They certainly could have if they wanted to. You know what I mean?
But now
Eh,
that you think, but now that it's over and now that Ace has passed, I bet they look back on that thinking, "Damn, I wish we would have."
Well, again, to close the circle, right? And to
Hmm.
just sort of bring it, I mean, let's face it, when you go to the family reunion, you don't go because you like everybody. You're like, oh, fucking Uncle Joe,
Yeah,
Aunt Sally. Oh, God, these people, I got to be around them again. You don't go because it's all fun and games. You go because it's just, at one point, those will be the last memories you have.
yeah.
And it is a bloodline, you know what I mean? And, I think Dave and I did the bonded by blood thing, best I remember. It was one of those like if like what
Yeah,
Gary Holt and Dave did, those guys bonded by blood, their album and that song
yeah.
title. I seem to think we did that at one point early on, you know what I mean? So I don't know, does that make us blood brothers? I guess it does,
I guess
so
so. Yeah.
I guess it does. But yeah, it does bring to light. Like you see the Eagles, you see these guys, and it's like how much hate can you have towards someone and just be that fucking miserable, and it
Yeah.
because and fans don't want to see it. They don't want to see it.
Mhm.
I don't want to see it. You know what I mean? I was sad when I would see Kiss arguing about stuff. I get it, having been in a
Mhm.
band my whole career. But we don't want to see our heroes argue. You know what I mean? And
Right.
I think that was probably some of the hardest parts. Probably when Dave and I were in a lawsuit because we're dissolving business matters and trying to get things settled properly that was fair for both of us. And we had to walk through that process for that to happen, and it sucks because it makes headlines, and those aren't the headlines you want. And I don't want those headlines with Dave.
Mhm.
Those were not the headlines that you know I am ever proud of in my life. Now I had to do it. I had to go through the process to have it land where it needed to, for business matters. But you know, um, no one wants to see their heroes at war. You know what I
Right.
mean? So,
Oh, totally. Um, I get. I mean, as we kind of wind down, I mean, what's kind of your just lasting impression of Ace? What was your, your takeaway of just Ace?
you know, he was very complimentary to me when we had dinner together over in Vegas at the Eddie Trunk thing, and I even heard him say maybe to his wife or something. He goes, "It was a really good conversation. I just have that guy David from Megadeth. I never knew, like, we never
Mhm.
knew each other, like, in that level, and
Yeah.
it was cool to kind of hear a little, overhear him saying that. You know what I mean? Like, that was a really great conversation. We already had each other's phone numbers and stuff, and we chatted a bit. Um, and, it was just nice to, because you get to know someone on a human level. And obviously, look, he'll be my hero forever, but it was more about just sitting down and chatting and getting to know somebody and feeling really good about it when you got up from the table. You know what I mean? And just kind of going, wow, I got to know a whole other side to him that I didn't know. And we didn't have any guitars in hand. We weren't on stage jamming. It wasn't any of that. It was just us talking shop a little bit, just breaking bread. Um, talking about just human stuff, and so that for me is my lasting impression. Um, because I never did jam with him on stage, I never did that. So for me, I think, and I am that guy. I'm a vocal communicator. That's why I talk so much on all these podcasts. You know what I mean? It's like I'm always a communicator, through speech and language. You know what I mean? So for me to have a heartfelt moment like that, and maybe that's the thing that bums me out a little bit with Dave is we talked, and then suddenly I'm out of the band and I'm fired, and there's this kind of really shitty, nasty press release, and it's like, the fuck, where'd that come from? It's like, where did that come from? That wasn't our last conversation, and there it was, and it was like, I as a vocal communicator am always more settled when words are they sort of settle the dispute,
Hmm.
and it's sort of you can walk away with a hug, a handshake, whatever, on something, so but yeah, I felt like that was a great way to have kind of lasting impressions of a final moment of me and Ace, just as two buddies,
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, my last impressions of Ace were not great, but the over the years, just like I said, loving his personality, loving the way he played, loving just every the energy that that guy emitted. Now that he's
Hmm.
gone, he's. I actually grabbed the mic at our show in Dallas. There was a moment in time where I was like, hey, just give me the mic for a second. I walked to the front of the crowd. I was just like, hey, we lost a true legend today. Let's give it up for Ace Frehley, and the venue erupted. But I just wanted to be able to kind of pay my respects to Ace as best I could. We were all kind of wondering. I was like, do we all know Kiss songs? Like,
I
like
know,
just
right? That's kind of what I'm wondering. Like, who's going to be out playing Kiss songs? You know what I mean?
yeah,
So, I mean, look out here with Kings of Thrash. We've been on the bus, just playing through them, ripping through. I started at sound check. We started ripping through a couple of tunes,
yeah,
and it's like, and it's funny because Fred and Chaz are younger. They're not Kiss fans, so to speak. Me and Jeff, we both grew. He dressed up as Ace. As much as
hmm
I was the bass player, I dressed up as Paul, probably because the Paul with my EBO bass, right? Paul's
nice.
makeup was easier to put on. So, Jeff and I both, we grew up. He actually saw the Kiss Alive tour at Hera Arena in Dayton. So I didn't
Nice,
see him until I guess it was probably a year and a half later on the Rock and Roll Over tour in Minneapolis when I saw him. But yeah, so we're kind of cut from the same cloth, and so it's you hear the you watch the videos and you see the Ace licks, and you can see how it influenced Dave and Slash and all these different people. You just kind of, as now we know as friends and as players, and we
yeah,
all knew that do 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 do
yeah,
do, right. We all
we can all do that solo.
dude,
Yeah,
we all knew that, right? And at some level, that style, it just played to our entire generation, man. Like
hmm
all of us have a little bit of Ace Frehley in us. You know what I mean? Even if we're bass players,
yeah,
we have a little bit of that. And again, I go back to the single most iconic lick of all has no notes. It's the beginning of Cold Gin and Kiss Alive when they do the and then
hmm
you take the toggle switch right. It's like, dude, what a brilliant thing to do with the toggle switch. You know what I mean? To
yeah,
me, that is probably Ace Frehley's most iconic lick is the toggle switch on the Les Paul. I think it's so freaking cool. And I'll close on this. It's funny.
yeah.
You see pictures of him, which looks like a Gibson Explorer, but it's actually an Ibanez Destroyer.
Okay,
It's like a Koa or a Carina top. He's got a white pick guard. I've got one exactly like that with a black pick guard. Same
nice,
pickups and everything. Yeah. In fact, Marty actually used it for the solos on Psychotron on Countdown to Extinction. It's a
nice.
super badass guitar. Yeah, so I saw some pictures. I saw some pictures with Ace with that. Oh, and one other thing, I saw a
Okay,
picture of it would have been probably Kiss Destroyer, there or Rock and Roll Over maybe. They're walking to the stage. It's an arena, and it's behind the stage, and they had a Fender Twin reverb set up with a mic on it. And I always found it interesting because in this a lot of pictures like Circus Magazine, they're in their backstage in their jam room warming up, and Ace
okay.
always had a
Hmm.
Fender Twin or a Fender amp back there. And I had heard, and I don't know if this is true, and maybe someone will come forward and talk about some rig rundowns of Ace's gear, but I had heard that as much as they had all the Marshalls on stage, that he played through a Fender Twin reverb with a distortion box. That was his
Nice.
tone, right?
Okay.
So I don't know, fact or fiction, I don't know. Maybe some gear nerds will come forward and give us some insights on that. I would like to know. So,
Nice.
you
Yeah,
know,
and I guess the last one was Paul's personal message to Ace, and he had a great photo of the two of them just like
right? I saw that.
laughing
Yeah,
together, man. That
yeah,
was that was a cool photo when he said, this
yeah,
is like my favorite photo of us of all time. And
yeah.
as much bad blood as they had, at some point they were having a good time.
Yeah, yeah, and that's how bands go. So yeah, rest in peace, Spaceman. We love you, dude. Ace was just awesome, man, and yeah, and to his wife and his family and everybody else. So condolences.